Hey guys, this is Brock and Sindri in the Forge again today, and we're just here to talk about the recent Star Wars Netflix, or not Netflix rather. It was on the Disney Plus, wasn't it? The Mandalorian. Um, so we'll just start with sort of our general thoughts, and then go into sort of maybe a little bit of an episode by episode, but not too in depth, not quite as in depth as the Witcher series. Just because with the Witcher series there was a little bit more to go off of. We had sort of the books and the games to go off of, whereas Star Wars it's sort of just there's a bit less that's already been covered that then happened in Mandalorian, so we don't sort of have to compare it to previous titles. We're just sort of comparing it as to what it is on its own. So we'll get straight into that. So what were your general thoughts on the Mandalorian?
So it was on Disney Plus, which I signed up to more or less because of this show. And again, as a platform, it's probably not for us to. We're not probably experts on the platform, but actually, I'm quite a fan of Disney Plus overall. So that it's succeeded in what it was obviously designed to do. When I heard that there was 8 episodes and they'd spent over $10 million budget per episode, I was interested first of all, and then when I saw that it was Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. Dave Filoni being of the Clone Wars fame.
Yeah.
I was actually pretty excited about this. It actually seemed like Jon Favreau, obviously being of Marvel Cinematic Universe fame, as well as other things from before that, but most notably recently. And so that there's a guy in Jon Favreau that can build a universe, if you like, or help build a universe. And there's a guy in Dave Filoni who seems to be a genuine Star Wars fan and has had relationships with these characters before, and creating like a episodic style show. The initial thoughts were first couple of episodes were very weak, which we'll touch on in a minute, and then it did sort of build a little bit more, and it did pick up towards the end, obviously. And what it feels like to me is really just feels like a live action cartoon in the Star Wars universe, really.
Yeah, which I guess isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think it sort of suits that with, sort of the main character Mando often sort of portraying his emotions with minimal sort of input. Like you can't really see his face. Obviously, he spends almost all of the show with his helmet on. So you sort of don't get the same level of sort of intimacy with your main character as you often would expect. But that kind of suits this because when he does give... when he does react or get angry or whatever, you sort of you can tell it's important to him now, because when in other situations where maybe he's been slighted or something minor has happened, he doesn't really show too much of a reaction, and I think that sort of comes from the cartoon side of things, where they sort of don't necessarily have to work with that in cartoons, because obviously they can sort of animate it how they want and show these emotions much easier when they're animating it, whereas here in live action it's a sort of different ballpark, and I think it still works quite well with Mando as the main character.
I think he's actually a pretty good main character to I guess be the glue for other side characters as well. So it's obviously it's set to be like a western, obviously, in the way it is. And these kind of episodic shows, I don't know how long they want it to go for, how many seasons, but usually you have main character with band of friends that either are in almost every episode, or some come up and go away for a couple of episodes and then come back. And those are the ones that are really the best characters in a way. It sort of reminds me in a sense of that Mass Effect with Shepard, where Shepard himself is not necessarily the best character with the best voice actor. For example, if you look at male Shepard anyway, but the squad that he builds, those are the real draw cards. You know what I mean? And Shepard is really just the glue that keeps them all together. And that's what I think Mando has the ability to be.
Yeah, like he's sort of the, I guess, captain of his own sort of squad at times, in his own way, because you're sort of seeing it from his perspective. So he's kind of the catalyst for all the other characters to sort of get together and have these interactions and end up on their missions. And again, I think Shepard is a good person to sort of equate him to, because they sort of achieve the same goal by bringing their more interesting side characters together, and sort of pushing the plot forward with their agenda as sort of the thing you're following.
Yeah, and then look, obviously for that you have to have compelling characters, and some people say they were. We'll go into it a little bit later. I thought the side characters were okay, couple of good moments, but there's a lot more drawbacks from this. So a lot of fans have come into this, and because it hasn't been the classic sort of, I guess, SJW-sized, fight that a lot of other stuff in the Star Wars universe has been recently. There's been like a breath of fresh air over it, and the fan base have tried to support it as much as possible because they're trying to show that they still do like new stuff from it, which I get. But I think that's still papering over the cracks of what I think is a subpar show, to be honest. And we can I guess go straight into the reasons why, and a quick episode by episode run of why. And I'm happy to get cracking on that if you like.
Yep, I'm happy to move on to that. Although obviously, it's been a little while since I've watched it, and sort of in a different way to The Witcher, the way the episodes work. I don't remember exactly which episode happened in which order, but I have a general idea, so we can sort of go into it.
That's right. I've got it in front of me here, so we'll go.
You have the
we'll go a little
list,
bit
yeah.
through it.
Okay.
Yeah. Now we're not gonna be doing like summaries of exactly the story of it, but we'll be talking about each episode. I will summarize very quickly some of it for you, or at least a couple of quick sentences, and that'll probably refresh your memory.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's this is what Jon Favreau said before the show. He said, after the stories of Jango and Boba Fett, another warrior emerges in the Star Wars universe. The Mandalorian is set after the fall of the Empire and before the emergence of the First Order. The series depicts a lone bounty hunter in the outer reaches of the galaxy, far from the authority of the New Republic. So that's the setup. It's after Return of the Jedi, after Luke and Darth Vader essentially took down the Emperor. So a few years later, I think 5 years or something like that, or at least a way before. So it's probably going to build in towards The Force Awakens. So that it's going to have a few things that are going to be perhaps not the best things for seasoned fans, but that's it was kind of like, okay, well, we can see how that goes. It's not going to be based purely on the Force or Jedi's by the looks of it. It's going to be based on like a kind of like a Mandalorian bounty hunter, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, so again, it's really good for people who loved Jango and Boba Fett, and generally just people who love the characters who aren't always the sort of all-powerful Jedi or Sith characters that can dominate everyone. Like Mando is pretty good, but he doesn't have Force powers, and that's sort of a bit of a draw as well.
So it was established pretty early on, particularly from episode 2 onwards, that Mando is not this all-defeating, all-powerful character. He actually loses quite a lot, and is actually rescued by the child, or Baby Yoda, in a series, and Baby Yoda is probably the best thing out of the whole series, and they milked it for everything it's worth, which is exactly what Star Wars has always done. It's really, Star Wars has always been about marketing too, to be honest. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I'm absolutely fine with that. That's the way the world works. But can it tell a good enough story in the meantime? And the question here is we're going to get into. So we'll go straight into episode 1. You kind of introduced to him through getting a job, essentially. Well, you're introduced to him in a bar. The classic like Western bar fight situation. You get that in The Witcher quite a lot too. It's a bit of a trope. But basically he gets this job, which is to go and get an asset, and he's basically told, get it. It's more if it's still alive, but you still get paid if it's dead. So basically dead or alive. And he goes and finds a droid there, like a, whatever you want to call it, like a, what they call it, like a fighting droid.
Like the assassin ones. I can't remember exactly what their model number is, but yeah, it's an assassin droid.
Yeah, so basically he goes off and does that and ends up in the fight scene, picks up the thing, and it turns out to be like a baby in the same species as Yoda. That's the end of the episode. It was not a bad first episode. It was okay, I thought.
Yeah, it does a good job at sort of just introducing what you'll be getting into. You've sort of got the main character Mando sort of taking contracts and then going from there. And the differences will be in how he sort of conquers the contract. And again, it sort of plays into his morals. So a bit more in the second episode, but definitely by the end of the first episode, you sort of realize that he's not sort of this cold-hearted killer. He won't just go and kill a baby Baby Yoda for money. He sort of wants to at least bring it back alive because he does have his morals. He's sort of likable in that sense. He's not just a heartless monster of a character. And yeah.
Yeah, well, you get introduced to this Mandalorian code. This is the way, kind of thing. You're also introduced to Nick Nolte's character, who's a little like Ugnaught alien thing that for some reason wants to help, all the time, which is just unexplained. But anyway, and yeah, he also has his catchphrase, which is "I have spoken." So they're obviously hitting up on the catchphrases, which is absolutely fine. Again, I have no real issue with that if it's done well, which it seems to have been mostly done okay with. Episode 2 basically is a real filler episode. I thought it was an awful episode overall, to be honest, where basically Mando goes back to his ship with the baby, or the child, and is found like the ship is stripped for parts by what are these aliens? I always forget what they're called, but they were the ones that showed up in the very first Star Wars movie.
The Jawas.
That's the one. Thank you very much. These little Jawas. So basically, ends up having to trade for his parts back, and they send him to a cave. Like X mission from the RPG game. They send him to a cave to pick up an egg from a monster that's guarding it, which is this giant rhino thing, which absolutely trashes Mando. Mando's then eventually saved by Baby Yoda, showing that he has the Force. They do that. He ends up at the end of the episode, hands over the baby, gets the reward, and that's the episode. It's really slow, like really, really slow episode.
It's literally like a side quest or a fetch quest in a video game was put into video format. So you're not even playing the fetch quest. You're watching the fetch quest. So it's another step removed from the boring fetch quest trope because you're literally just watching it with no control over it. Yeah, it was one of the weakest episodes in the show for sure, with minor moments where it was okay near the end.
Yeah, I think at least in games, sometimes fetch quests are designed to introduce you more to a character or develop that character a little bit with some conversational dialogue, or at least explore the world a little bit so they can show off the graphics and the world that they have. Whereas this one to me was just we need to make it 8 episodes filler. And we're not quite ready for the next bit, so it's absolutely filler. So I to be honest, I really didn't like the second episode, and I almost said I'm not going to watch the third one from it, but I got to it anyway. And episode 3 is the first one directed by Deborah Chow, who directs another one later on, and there's a good chance I think that she should be the one that does the next Star Wars movies, because I thought it was pretty good. Basically, this is where he actually does deliver the child to the client, again, gets the reward. Basically, he then actually asks what the plans were, so he actually showing some morals, like he's actually maybe grown a little bit attached to this child, and when he kind of learns that they're I guess torturing it and carrying out experiments, he basically comes back, and it's probably the coolest part so far in the show of the 3 episodes, where he basically he kills stormtroopers and rescues the child, and then there's a standoff with all the other guild members from this bounty hunting clan, where down the street, this is essentially the main street of the cowboy town, there's a standoff and then a shootout, and it's pretty well done. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, so he sort of conducts after handing the child in and then sort of coming to regret it. He sort of raids the little location that he handed the Baby Yoda off to, slaughters a bunch of stormtroopers. Again, he does take some shots, but he's sort of got the special armor on, so he, it shows that he's not just steamrolling them. He sort of is on a similar level to everyone else around him. He's not completely unstoppable. He takes back Baby Yoda, and if he was by himself, he would have probably failed. But his sort of Mandalorian guild members, as you said, sort of come to sort of help him out. And it's one of my favorite sort of scenes of the whole show. Really, they all come to help him and say, "Yep, this is the way." And they sort of hint in this episode at the Mandalorians that use sort of the jetpacks, like Boba and Jango Fett. A lot of them have sort of the jetpacks, and they're sort of obviously the more veteran Mandalorians of this guild, whereas our main character Mando has pretty simple armor, no jetpack, and he sort of makes a comment near the end saying, "Oh, I have to get me one of those," hinting at a later episode in the show where obviously he will eventually get one.
Yes. Then that brings us nicely onto episode 4, which I think is probably the worst episode of the whole series, even worse than episode 2, where he goes into hiding with the child, ends up on this agricultural planet, meets Cara Dune, who is played by what's her name, Gina Carrasina, ex MMA fighter. Not really an actress, and it shows. I have to say, her acting was super poor. And of course, because it was 2019, he gets into a fight with her at the start, and she absolutely destroys him. Which, okay, it makes sense if it's MMA fighter Gina versus Pedro Pascal, actor versus actor. But this is, it wasn't my favorite thing to do. But of course, that has to happen. And then, Baby Yoda shows up, breaks up the fight. They become friends somehow, and then end up protecting this village from some small-time criminals fight. And again, it felt like ridiculous amounts of filler this episode to me.
Yeah, I think the majority of the episode was sort of just not much happening. Again, I don't know if it was necessarily filler. Like a lot of it, he sort of had to establish his connection with this character. But yeah, it was a lot of it was just kind of you could have not had a whole episode dedicated to it, really. And I think this was the episode where he sort of had almost a change of heart, where he almost decides to take off his helmet, or was that the next episode?
He did take off his helmet, but no one was looking.
Right. No, I meant with the lady in like the village that he ends up staying at. He sort of almost decides to stay.
Yeah, so he took off the helmet when she made him food, but then she had gone outside, and the kids are all outside.
And then I think near the end so there's definitely that, and then I think near the end of the episode they were sort of she was sort of trying to convince him to stay, and obviously he knew he couldn't, but he sort of had a bit of a wavering, like he almost decided to do it, and then I think the episode sort of ends where ends with like the sort of bandit attack. Like I think there's these sort of like bandit like raiders or whatever who are raiding this village. I think this is in this episode.
That's right. It's correct. That's right.
Yeah. So it sort of.
The actress is in like 5 things. The one the villager. She's been in like 5 things in her like IMDb profile, and I think all of them have been like unrequited love interest, like not even named characters, but she's always done the same thing. One tries to like convince someone to stay, and then they think about it, but then they realize that their place is back in the battle or whatever, and so she's obviously very typecast.
There's nothing else she can do.
I didn't think it was a good episode personally. I didn't.
Yeah, I just think it sort of showed. I mean, again, I like to see weakness in a main character, but I think this was a little bit. I don't know how to. I wouldn't say too soon, but I think it was sort of like a little bit forced for me.
There was one stupid part when there was I think it was an AT-AT, or an ATST, was in the fight, and so the Mandalorian, their armor and their weapons are like sacred to them. It's like their thing. But there's this bit where like Cara Dune like grabs his rocket launcher. She's got no armor on, by the way, and jumps towards the AT with his weapon, with Mando's weapon, and it's like, what the hell? That wouldn't happen. It's so stupid. Like, the one that doesn't have armor is the one that jumps towards it, plus it's his gun. Like, he would not give his gun over like that. It wouldn't happen.
Yeah, again, he knows how to use it, so all she has to do is give him the plan.
Lightsaber to Leia,
Yeah. Or to Han Solo, like, it just doesn't make sense,
Yeah, exactly. So, a bit silly. And I at that point, so like the 4th episode of a series is always this really, it's like a landmark episode of the first season of a new show, where basically people either really get invested from that point, it seems to be, or the stats around switch offs and not watching again. Obviously, it's bigger in a non-streaming kind of show, like one that back in the old days where it was on cable TV or whatever. It's more of a thing because you actually got to be home at 8 p.m. on Thursdays or whatever to catch the show or whatever it may be. But basically, episode 4 is like a real key episode of a series, and that was episode 4, and it was bad. Like, it was bad. But I guess people had already committed to Disney Plus as a service, and so even though they still did it weekly, you still got people watching the next episode, and the next episode wasn't great either, to be honest. Honestly, I thought episode 5 was, so they went to Tatooine, or he went to Tatooine, and then there was that woman that was going to like fix his ship, and it ended up trying to like look after and telling him off and trying to look after the child, like the baby Yoda. And there was this like supposedly young bounty hunter that like just wanted to get into the guild or whatever. That had a bounty, which again, a lot of inconsistencies in this show. If he's not in the guild, how's he got a bounty? Doesn't make sense. Also, in that same scene, you've got Mando that's been set up as not liking droids and not trusting droids, and yet the bartender in that bar is a droid, and he talks to him quite freely. And it's like, that also doesn't really make much sense to me. But there you go. This episode, I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. There was this like, what would you call it? It's like a betrayal, essentially, by this young like bounty hunter, which Mando had to go basically fix up, more or less.
Yeah, it was quite predictable, really. We sort of knew. You could sort of tell that that's what they were going to do with the episode. It wasn't particularly like, oh, cannot believe this young upstart bounty hunter betrayed Mando. But like, what a shock! Yeah. It was quite predictable. And this won't be the first or last time that Mando gets betrayed, and it's sort of predictable either way.
Yeah. Well, in the very next episode 6, I think is like, of the whole season up to that point, was probably the strongest one, and it was called The Prisoner. Basically, he goes to meet his own old mate that he used to get work from, and he says he's got a job, and it's basically getting someone out of a prison ship, like a droid-run prison ship, which I think is pretty cool setup. So they put a team together. Bill Burr is like the leader of this team. I love Bill Burr. One of the few comedians that isn't scared to isn't like this like liberal agenda all the time, which I think is great. He's really good, and he played it quite well. He actually admitted at Bill Burr himself that he's never been a Star Wars fan, but he still delivered a couple of punchlines very well about being a former stormtrooper, which I thought was really good. As in, that's implying he has not got a good aim. You had another droid there, which is voiced by Richard Ayoade, who I've always liked as well from like the IT Crowd and other shows that he's done. And by the way, I think would make a really good next Doctor Who, which I guess we might make a video on at some point in the future, potentially. But yeah, then you had I think Osha from Game of Thrones / Tonks from Harry Potter, actress, be a Twi'lek. Didn't look bad, didn't look great either as a Twi'lek. Like, the costume design wasn't spot on for this one, I thought. And finally, Clancy Brown was I think a Zabrak, like the same species as Darth Maul, like a giant, like devil.
Yeah, like a pretty big one. Yeah. This is my favorite episode of the season, just for the record. It still has some issues, but definitely is my favorite. The setup is really quite cool. The sort of droid-run prison ship, where there's really only like two, I think. We only see two sort of non-droid, like organic people on there who are sort of running it, and then literally all of the security and like everything else is done by droids that sort of just patrol the halls and kill anyone on sight. Basically, it was quite well done in my opinion. But again, sort of predictable. Betrayal is predictable, as with the previous episode, and sort of Mando's little team. After busting out this other Twi'lek, like this, I guess, sister or brother or whatever. I think it's a sister, but it looks like a man.
The brother.
Oh, is it actually a male? Okay, yeah. They sort of bust him out of his prison cell, and then they sort of push Mando in and lock him in there. And then on their way out, I mean, they sort of set it up pretty obviously. Like, they were sort of bullying Baby Yoda on the ship, rather, a little bit beforehand, and it was just sort of building up the sort of animosity between Mando and his sort of little crew, which again, a little bit predictable, but by the time he sort of gets around to one by one sort of beating each of them by himself on the way off the boat, off the ship, is pretty good. Like, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was a pretty well put together episode, considering it was my favourite one of the season as well. Obviously not without its own weaknesses, very predictable. Like I said, a few costume issues where it didn't look quite spot on, for your $10 million. But yeah, I think generally pretty strong episode. And it was at that point for me, episode 6, where I kind of thought, okay, if it's more like this, I'm okay with it. I'm good with this show. I think it will be a good show. So then it goes straight from that one into episode, and that's like the last one before like the finale double episode. Usually, this is what often happens with a series where the last 2 episodes lead into each other. So you had episode 7, which is again by Deborah Chow. Basically, he gets a message from Apollo Creed's character, who was the one that gave out the, I guess, jobs or the bounties, essentially, to these bounty hunters. And he says, "Come back. It's been overrun by Imperial troops. Your original client's back. They want to have the child back, and we need to work something out." So they sort of, they agree to like have a plan of how to sort this out. Mando's very like skeptical, so he puts his team back together. Cara Dune, Quill, who was the original, like the Nick Nolte's character from the first episode, comes back, or first 2 episodes, I should say, and then like basically that same droid that he'd shot in episode 1 at the end, the assassin droid, has been rebuilt, but now it's like a caregiving droid for some reason. So they did this whole scene, I don't know if you remember, where it was like a voiceover and he was talking about how he had to reprogram it and like essentially like teach it
train
again.
It to, yeah.
Which, to be honest, I really hated it. I really hated that. Like, it's stupid. Like, it doesn't work like that. It will never work like that. That is a thing that they put in which they did not need to put in at all. I hated it completely. It's not that's not how it works. Like, I'm sorry. No, you are programmed with something. So his point about droids are not evil, they're neutral, it just depends on who shapes them. Yeah, that's true, because if you program droids to kill children, that's not an evil droid, that's an evil programmer, right? The droid's just carrying out the task that it's programmed for, so I get that. But it's not like training a baby. It's not like nurture. Droids are all completely programming. So, anyway, I didn't like that. It was also a waste of time in the episode.
Yeah, it also, again, it sort of comes back in episode 8 after this, but he's even training it to do basic like menial tasks like pouring, like it was struggling to pour, and then he sort of trained it until eventually it learned how to do it. And it's like, yeah, it's not a baby, it's a droid. Like it should be able to move its arms with more precision than like a human. So I just don't understand like what they were going for there. It just doesn't make sense to me that he could rebuild this droid but not just quickly tweak its programming so that it's not allowed to kill anymore or something. That would be a better explanation than just, oh, he taught it to be a caregiver, like baby nurturing droid that just serves the plot and that's it.
Yeah.
Because again, this comes back in episode 8 where suddenly he remembers how to do certain things, and we'll get there. And it's just a little bit forced.
Agreed. What we also have in this episode as well, I think, an inconsistency. Every reviewer that I've watched so far, and I'm, it's not a knocking on them individually, but people like Nerderotic and a few of the other ones that are online liked this particular scene, but I thought none of it made sense to me. So Quill, who is again the alien guy, he is a scene where he talks about how he earned his what do you call it? He earned his through manual work, or earned his freedom through manual labor, and it took 3 human lifetimes?
Something like that. So we're assuming, sort of 300 or so.
Okay, so let's make a call that a human lifetime, still life expectancy, let's say 75 years. So we're saying it took him 225 years, that's 75 times 3 lifetimes, 225 years to earn his freedom, okay?
Yep.
Are you sensing a mathematical inconsistency here so far?
A little bit, yes.
Because there are still people alive, as we're about to see in this episode, that were, Moffs from the original Empire, which can't be 225 years ago. They can't be 225 years old. So how did he?
Because the Empire didn't last that long.
225 years.
Yeah.
So how did he work for 225 years for the Empire? I mean, I'm a little bit at a loss here. Like, again, I get why people were saying that it's a cool thing, but again, it's not consistent with
it's
canon.
Just lying. It doesn't make sense. Unless his character's just lying. Like, unless this character's just being an asshole and lying, trying to sort of I was a slave for 225 years or whatever. No, like the empire didn't even last that long. Sorry, like
True human
literally
lifetime,
untrue.
right? Do humans only live for 5 years? Because then I might believe it.
Even then, a little bit, little like not sure about that one. But yeah, it's just it's a little bit silly, a little bit silly.
Yeah, so I just know. As soon as I heard that, I thought, no, that doesn't make sense. So yeah. Um, anyway, there you go. Like, other than that, like it wasn't the worst episode. It was a good setup for what would obviously be a finale. They were setting up for a bit of a battle scene, which sort of did happen, obviously, in the final episode. Moff Gideon is this bad guy that comes up. So he flies in on his TIE fighter. The wings fold down, which is kind of, I don't know if that's cool or not. Like,
Sure,
it
sure,
wasn't.
whatever.
Yeah,
Fine.
I've never seen that before, but actually, but I didn't mind it, to be honest, as an innovation. I didn't mind it. And then he came out, and it's Gus Fring from Breaking Bad. Anyone that's watched Breaking Bad, and he was an awesome bad guy throughout that series too. So that was pretty cool. But then there's a lot of stupid stuff that happens. So like he stands out there. And then in episode 8, let's go into episode 8 because they lead into each other. He like gives him until sundown to get what he wants. Why? Why does he need to do that? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
Like it's
the whole sort of scene with them like holding out, it just doesn't make sense. They have so much like technology and whatnot. Like this is like a sci-fi kind of universe. Like there's a lot of things they could have done but didn't, just so that the plot could move forward, so that Mando doesn't lose here with his team. Basically, it's just silly.
it's a lot of plot conveniences, which I think unfortunately are quite rampant amongst the media these days. I think a bit of lazy writing, actually, I think on this behalf. And again, I don't want to knock Jon Favreau, who I believe was the writer for almost all the episodes, and he was the writer for this one. But it did feel like plot convenience. You know, again, to me, a lot of the season has been plot convenience still. And a lot of, as I said, a lot of the fact that it wasn't this, the fact that there wasn't as much like the typical like SJW ideology coming into the show has sort of clouded a lot of fans' judgment, and by they've been saying it's a good show, but actually, this is the sort of thing that I don't think it actually is. Um, I don't think it is a good show. I think it's a very subpar show that has a lot of issues, a lot, like as I said, plot conveniences, a lot of I think mistakes in writing, like for example what we just talked about. One of the other things that comes up in this episode is that Mando is hurt, and the droid is like, I've got what can fix you, but you have to take your helmet off. Now I'm happy if he needs to do that, but don't show us his face yet. Like, that is still too soon for that. We're on episode 8. Build that up more. You can show that his helmet's off, but don't show the face. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again,
Like,
it's just such an obvious forced plot. Again, it's like a plot convenience. It's like they decided, oh, we should show Mando's face in episode 8. How are we going to do that? Oh, I know. Let's just have the droid tell him that he needs to take it off. Like, does he really though? Like, does he? Probably not. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just a little bit too
So
forced.
there's
Like,
another one as well. Like, this bar that they were in, they went to the sewers because they were heading towards where the Mandalorians guild were hiding out. How did they get into the sewers straight from the bar? Like, there's just a convenient entrance there. And then on a bigger note, the sort of head or guild master, if you like, for the Mandalorians is this female Mandalorian, and obviously they all disappeared. They all had to reset or relocate after they revealed themselves in episode 3. And yet, so there's obviously was this purge apparently of Mandos. There was a lot of helmets that were found, so you get the impression that they've all been killed off. But the leader is still there. Like, why would you still be there? It's obviously presumably been like days or weeks even at this point.
Assumedly weeks. Yeah, he's gone through quite a lot since that episode happened.
Yeah, and like your whole guild has been killed, and you're still there. Really?
Well, and yeah, again,
Anyway.
I'm not sure. Yeah, the assumption, I guess, because of all the smashed helmets and whatnot, is that they were sort of massacred. But it doesn't really make sense. Like, did she go and collect the helmets from outside, or did they get raided in the sewers? If yes, like, surely everybody knows these sewers' existence now. Why would there just be entrances into like the bar? Like, there's a lot of questions that come up, and not really any answers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then there's this like bit where they obviously go and escape, and the droid has to sacrifice itself. And again, it's a fairly unearned sacrifice at this point, if you ask me. Like, I had no emotion for this at all. It was obvious from essentially episode 1 when you first met him that this would come up. To be honest.
Well, yeah. In the end credits, there's a lot of art of him, so you know he's important as well.
Yeah, but also in the first episode, there was a lot of like kept trying to initiate self-destruct sequence, and Mando kept having to say no. So it was like that is Chekhov's gun right there. Yeah. And lo and behold, it's already happened. So I was not really invested in that happening. It was like, okay, cool, whatever. And then there's this bit where Moff Gideon on his TIE fighter comes, and Mando has his jetpack now, and he sort of like sputters into flying up to him and basically taking out the TIE fighter. And there's a crash that anyone should have died from, but obviously there's not been any real blood or proper deaths in this. So Moff Gideon, just gets out, and he's got a dark blade, a dark lightsaber.
Yeah, no comment.
So okay. I mean, that's a thing that has come up in some of the extended universe that is now, or Legends now. I think it came up in Rebels.
Yeah.
And Clone Wars series. So Dave Filoni obviously is experienced with it, but why this guy has it, I don't know. But okay, I mean, when season 2 comes out, let's have a look, see what's up. But I didn't like it. And one of the directors, director for the final episode, and I think I'm mistaken, but that was the only one that he directed. Is Taika Waititi, who is the director of Thor Ragnarok, and I don't rate him at all. But he seems to be the biggest thing, and including in like the geek world, everyone seems to love him. But I thought Thor Ragnarok, for example, I know we're not talking about that. I thought that was awful. I didn't think it was anywhere near as funny as what people said. I think it destroyed 3 characters and a whole civilization, the Asgardians, but that's a whole other story. And that's what Taika Waititi did to them, right? And now we're at a point where people are saying, oh, it's amazing that he's involved in this. Well, episode 8 was awful of this show, in my opinion. I did not like it at all.
Yeah, it really wasn't very good. It was a pretty bad climax in general. Considering that's what it's supposed to be. It was sort of a lot predictable.
Let's not forget, these episodes cost $10 million per episode. Did any of that go to actually, proofreading
writing it?
And right? It didn't feel like it. Did any of that go to actually hiring high quality actors? No, they were all overacting their parts. Like Apollo Creed, who is Carl Weathers, I believe his name is. He played Apollo Creed in the old Rocky movies. He was was his name Grief Karga, the guy that was, the black guy that was giving out the and he's a very, very well known actor, but he was overacting his part. Like, it wasn't believable. It was overacted. Cara Dune's actress is not an actress. She's an MMA fighter, and it shows. And again, it's not a knock on her. She does what she does well. She's a tough chick, and she looks like it, but she's not an actress. She's not good. I didn't think most of the acting in the show was good. I thought the script was basic. The dialogue was basic. The best part of the show is probably Baby Yoda, which I can't work out whether it looks good or not. It looks quite obviously fake, to be honest. Like, it's obviously not CGI at all, which is weird.
Yeah, I don't mind Baby Yoda, but I know that he kind of just exists for the sole purpose of merch sales.
Yeah. I mean, I want my own Baby Yoda.
Yeah, to be honest, I just kind of want the sort of like freezer, like space pod that Baby Yoda has, like the little pod cool. That it just floats around and he just gets to sit in, like Frieza from Dragon Ball. That would be nice, to be honest. But
yeah,
whatever.
I'd love a Baby Yoda in general. Just like actually, the funniest part of Baby Yoda was obviously in episode 7, which we didn't mention before, but where he started doing the Force choke after Cara Dune was like beating Mando in an arm wrestling contest, and that was quite good. That was really quite well done, and I thought that was funny too. Where you just see it go and like squeeze its fist or whatever. It was quite good, and I had to stop it from happening, which I thought was cool. Then they introduced this like healing thing, which was going to be, they did that purely because they knew they were going to do this bullshit in the latest episode, in Rise of Skywalker. But no, I think this is like it's a live action cartoon, and it's if you treat it as such, is this better or worse than Clone Wars? I don't think it's. I don't think it's better. I think it's worse.
Yeah, I think it's worse as well. But again, it's hard to look at it without comparing it to sort of the sequels, which is the other main sort of cinematic Star Wars thing going on right now, and it's better
Yep.
than that for sure. It's a lot better than that. So at least it's sort of, I guess, a step in the right direction, hopefully. But it's definitely not. It's not Clone Wars level. It's not original trilogy level. I don't even think it's really prequel level, in all honesty. But yeah.
Well, I agree. Well, you've also so they brought in other well known names as directors. So like Bryce Dallas Howard, who you may know as being the chick from Jurassic World, those two movies.
Yeah.
She was also in I think Twilight, and she's Ron Howard's daughter. She was also Gwen Stacy in Spider-Man 3, the Tobey Maguire one.
Yeah.
Along with being in an episode called Nosedive of Black Mirror, which is not a bad episode. Now, she seems to be this popular thing that always gets jobs, but she was the one that directed episode 4, which is, the absolute worst episode of the whole series. Yeah. So that, getting names in doesn't mean a thing. It was this was written by Jon Favreau, but I mean, I'm not anti Jon Favreau. I've always been a bit of a fan of his. He's been in some good comedy movies even before he was involved in the MCU. But I think that the whole Jon Favreau thing has probably been oversold in this, and I got the feeling that maybe there's not enough Dave Filoni, to be honest. And then of course no George Lucas at all. He's not even consulted on this, so I think that is we'll talk about this in another video, but I think that the Star Wars media that's coming out is missing the George Lucas effect, to be honest. They're obviously building into something about like this Baby Yoda, like maybe this Baby Yoda is a clone, or they've used his DNA to clone. But is that building towards something to do with the sequel trilogy? I don't know. But anyway, I mean, again, it's not complete rubbish. But I mean, we always ask this question now in our videos, like, is this something that fans will enjoy? I mean, it seems to be the feedback has been that online, but again, I think that's based more on the fact that it hasn't had an agenda, like a political agenda in there, rather than the fact that it's actually any good. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, I think fans are enjoying it because it's not the sequels, basically, is what I'm getting from this. It's sort of like, you've got, if you have to pick between the two, Mandalorian is definitely better, but it's still not, it's still not perfect for the fans, and as one of them, I definitely don't think it was a perfect show in the slightest.
So here's another question, and I can ask this because we just a couple of weeks ago reviewed Netflix's The Witcher that also dropped, also 8 episodes, interestingly enough. Which one would you have to go back and watch one? Which one would you watch over the other one? Let's say you can only watch one, not both.
In all honesty, I think I'd rather rewatch The Witcher. I think it had a few more good episodes rather than just a lot of sort of okay or subpar episodes.
Okay, yeah.
What about you?
I would normally say I'd probably say that as well, but to me, I mean, the only reason why I'd still watch Mandalorian is just because, it's still at least fresh to me. Like I don't know where it's going, whereas I know where The Witcher's going, purely from the books and the games and everything else. And that's probably the only reason. In terms of the scripts and the dialogues, The Witcher's better. In terms of obviously it looks like there's a massive disparity in what budgets each people had, and obviously who's involved. And yet, I still, for me, like the fight scenes in The Witcher, I think were choreographed better. I think that some of the casting was done better, not all of it. I must hasten to add, but yeah, I think that the fact that it's even a question based on who's involved and the money involved in each is already ridiculous.
Yeah, you definitely expect a lot more from the Mandalorian, like just in terms of budget alone.
Yes. So I guess then the next question is, what would you roughly give it out of 10, based on our sort of general rating system?
Yep. I guess without going, sort of fully into each category, I think my overall would probably end up being something around a 6 out of 10. which is again that's not a bad score necessarily. Like 5 is sort of like acceptable, so 6 is better than baseline, but it's not quite into the sort of good or exceptional territory. What about you?
Yeah, okay. I think for me, it's got to be around 3.5.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
fair enough.
it's um, I think it's objectively it's not a good show. I think it's the scores on like Rotten Tomatoes and everything. Like, as I said, I think is vastly influenced by the fact that it's almost like a protest against the movies,
Yeah,
and the politics that have come into Hollywood in various other forms, rather than actually the quality of this as a show. So I think if you judge it based on it as a show, 3.5. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad that it hasn't crept in too much of the politics, because at least we can watch it for what it is. And unfortunately, in this case, what it is not good, in my opinion.
yeah, that's fair enough. And with that, I guess we're sort of done with our review of Mandalorian, unless you have any other closing remarks. But I think we sort of
Nope.
summarized it pretty well.
Yep.
And this will be sort of the second sort of Star Wars related video, I think, in recent times, and we'll definitely be getting sort of more Star Wars related videos out when we can.
Absolutely. All right. Catch you next time.
Yep. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.